This chart shows the gap at the center of the SeanCombs trial. Federal prosecutors presented 2 months of testimony and asked for 11 years in prison. On October 3, 2025, the judge handed down a sentence of 4 years and 2 months. The aftermath shifted almost immediately. Just 4 days after that sentencing, Combs formally asked President Donald Trump for a pardon. Factoring in time already served since his arrest in 2024, a man who was initially facing life in prison is now on a timeline to be released as early as late 2027. It leads to a specific question about how the federal legal system functions. How does a sprawling sex trafficking indictment result in a 4-year sentence that both the prosecution and the defense are now actively fighting? SeanCombs spent 30 years as a dominant figure in the music and fashion industries. After founding Bad Boy Records in 1993, he expanded into global business ventures, fragrance lines, and political circles, building a net worth that made him one of the wealthiest figures in hip-hop. During those decades, allegations of abuse existed mostly as industry rumors and private settlements. That changed in November 2023, when his former partner Cassie Ventura filed a civil lawsuit detailing years of physical and sexual assault. The catalyst for a federal criminal investigation arrived shortly after, with the release of 2016 hotel surveillance footage showing Combs physically assaulting Ventura in a hallway. While raw video footage can destroy a public reputation, a federal criminal conviction requires meeting a specific evidentiary threshold. The surveillance tape proved the assault, but it did not automatically prove the much broader charges in the federal indictment. The most severe charges in the indictment, racketeering and sex trafficking, carried the potential for life in prison. To secure a conviction, prosecutors had to prove coercion beyond a reasonable doubt. After deliberating, the jury decided that the legal standard for coercion had not been met. They acquitted Combs on every charge that carried a potential life sentence. He was convicted instead on 2 counts of violating the Mann Act. This law prohibits transporting people across state lines for prostitution, but unlike the trafficking charges, it does not require the government to prove that those people were coerced or forced. This verdict meant the jury did not declare the events never happened. They ruled that the specific legal definition of a forced enterprise wasn't fulfilled. That distinction dropped Combs's maximum prison exposure from a lifetime to just a few years. The sentencing hearing in Manhattan became a clash over the impact of those crimes. Prosecutors argued for 11 years to reflect the psychological damage to the victims, while the defense requested immediate release based on time already served. Judge Arun Subramanian chose a middle ground of 50 months. He told the survivors in the courtroom that this sentence was intended to send a message of accountability to abusers. Prosecutors immediately labeled the sentence unconstitutional. Their argument is that the judge used the word coercion to justify the 4-year term, despite the jury having already acquitted Combs of the coercion-based charges. The result was a sentence that left no one satisfied. It gave prosecutors the grounds for an immediate appeal, while leaving the survivors with an outcome that felt disconnected from their testimony. The federal criminal trial focused on a narrow set of charges, but dozens of active civil lawsuits continue to move through the courts. These suits include allegations of assault and conduct involving minors, never part of the criminal trial. Civil court uses a lower burden of proof, called preponderance of the evidence. Instead of proving a claim beyond a reasonable doubt, a plaintiff only needs to show that their version of events is more likely than not to be true. This follows the precedent of the O.J. Simpson case, where a defendant survived a criminal acquittal but was still held liable for the same acts in a civil arena. For the accusers whose claims were not part of the federal indictment, the civil courts have now become the primary path for seeking accountability. This sentence stands in contrast to other recent high-profile cases in the entertainment industry. Singer R. Kelly is currently serving 31 years for trafficking and racketeering, while producer Harvey Weinstein was sentenced to 16 years in Los Angeles. Survivor advocates see the Combs acquittals as a sign of a more skeptical era for juries. In their view, modern jurors are increasingly difficult to convince when it comes to the most severe criminal definitions of trafficking. The story of the Combs verdict now moves into 3 separate arenas: an active pardon request, an appeal from federal prosecutors, and dozens of civil lawsuits that have yet to be decided.